to pick from what I already said, I translated my own poem, The Man Who Ran Through the Tunnel. I translated it into Shona. And then one of my friends is also a poet, translated it into Shona as well. Of the two translations, I prefer his because it's more poetic than mine. Mine is actually, poetry, when you are a Shona speaker and you are writing poems, the way you write it is informed by things that are not there when you are writing in English. So I couldn't do what my friend Terry did. I could only translate it, give a literal, almost word-for-word translation from English into Shona. Whereas Tarengwa saw the poem, and gave it as a Shona poet would give it. So again, I think it responds.
And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about your poem?
I actually think his poem is better than, his translation is better than mine.
But do you feel it's true to your poem?
It's better than it's an improvement on mine. Yeah. I mean, this is how a Shona poet would write it. It also raises the question of, when you speak more than one language, you can do things in one language that you cannot do in another language, or you can do some things in one language better than in another language.
And even simple things. I'm thinking about the word salt. So there are, in some languages, you can just translate salt.
Yeah.
But I don't know about other languages, but in sign language you either do, so like in England, in our Western society we do salt, because that's a salt shaker, but I chose to use salt, because that's how you might use salt if you're travelling, you've got a bag of salt. But there might be other words and forms of using salt.
It's also like snow, Some people have got, many words for snow. And in English, I think we've got, fewer that we use functionally at a functional level. I don't know, are they?
Well, I just think the process is wholly fascinating, wholly, humbling really, because my linguistic skills are, in other languages are fairly poor, to my shame. And so to have several people interested enough to read my poem and to actually do something else creative with it in a different language was absolutely brilliant. Working closely with Elvire, we had a dialogue, a kind of email, Facebook dialogue about certain words, didn't we, the title, because I was mentioning ambiguity, which was a deliberate strategy in my poem, because I wanted a title to reverberate in lots of different directions. And so we talked to get to that precision, how you might interpret that without fixing it entirely in one way. So that was interesting. And I think the word sanctity came up as well, as kind of how we take that word, certainly to be a celebratory sign language. And so the process, as I say, was fascinating, humbling, and incredibly enlarging. Just seeing in this event tonight, and with you joining in as well, which has added that extra dimension to it.
Have you translated much poetry? Yeah.
That's nice.
I was a bit shocked when Ambrose made you do it just on the spot. That's
There's a reason for that. Elvire also alluded to how there's politics in language. We see it even in a space like the one that we are in now, where the assumption is that we will use one language and the language that we will use is English. Why are we using that language? Why can we not have the same conversation in many different languages? And also, if you go on, we are in Brexiting Britain. Some people feel empowered to do things that a few years back would have been unimaginable. For example, if we speak one language and we're using public transport and we are speaking in that language, there will be some people in that space who feel that they are empowered to tell us which language we should use. What gives them that right? So language is political. How we use it, when we use it, why we use it, those are, and also how the English language itself came to have the currency that it has. That has a lot to do with how with the colonial enterprise that the country was on for centuries, not centuries.
And so much is translated from English into other languages, but not the other way. So there's so much literature in other languages that isn't translated back into English. Because for colonising power, because English is the currency, isn't it? And so it's not seen as, it's kind of not interested, which is a bit crap.
So we are taking, we're taking the other way. We're saying that we are actually interested in the other languages that are in this space. And this space is, how you define this space is entirely up to you. You can define it as, the space that we are in right now. You can define it as the city. You can define it as the country. You can define it as the world. We are in this together. So let's see what we are talking about. Let's see if we are talking about the same thing. Even if we have the same source material. What are we talking about? Yeah. Now I'm sounding confused. It's poetry.
Should we don't have terribly much time left. I wonder if you would take some questions, if people have comments or questions they'd like to bring to the discussion. Yes.
I'm interested to hear how you would feel about a translator deviating from your original and adding a little bit of their own interpretation. Would you prefer a translation to be very close to what you came up with, or would you welcome them making choices?
I'd welcome them making choices. I think that's very healthy because no piece of writing is ever fixed. I mean, you can look at something you've written yourself and you think, well, actually something else is jumping out. You can read somebody else's poem and read it in different ways each time. So I welcome the creativity of the translator and the fact that there are so many different versions. I mean, that's only helpful as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm afraid my first reaction is, get off, it's my poem. But after a while, yes, having heard the translations of my poem, I now can see things that I didn't see when I first wrote it. So it's really expanded my view of what I was writing. So very useful in that way.
And also, some things don't mean the same across cultures. So choices have to be made. So I'm all for choice. And if you make choices, it shows that you're thinking about the material, and you're also thinking about your audience, and you're thinking about the person who wrote the poem.
There are also linguistic choices you have to make, not just cultural items, but linguistic forms of the structures of the language are different. So my language, Gujarati, is quite different from English. Totally different script, everything. So I have to then, if I translate one of these, I have to choose one linguistic item that doesn't exactly match the linguistic item there. So it doesn't perform the same linguistic function. But the poem has to retain its integrity and identity. And so the linguistic choices do become problematic.
But it's also about, it's like it's working within its own skin, isn't it?
Yes.
And quite a lot of time there's a lot of poets who may not necessarily have the same language as the originating poet. So you might get an English poet working with a Polish poet, and they can work together with a dictionary even just,
yes.
and half a bit of each other's language, and you'll recreate another poem that has the skeleton and some of the flesh of the original poem, but then is refleshed in the other language. So it's almost like a whole, it's another creative act. And I wonder how much you find the act of translating poetry as opposed to translating other texts a more creative act, a more freeing act for you as translators.
Sorry, did you ask?
Yeah. Out of curiosity, would you rather choose a translator who is a poet in the target language, or a translator who is just a professional in...
I wouldn't mind, because I think both would be interesting. I'd say more the merrier and different types of writer, really, because they'll all yield something interesting.
So would you welcome competition? I mean, what if the translated text surpassed the original? Would it be okay?
Absolutely fine.
That happens with
I'm not precious about my poetry. So I think, once it's out there, please do something with it and be creative yourself with it. So that's absolutely fine. Embellish.
That happens with my poem, that's how the translation actually improves the poem. I'm very pleased about that.
And yet for me as a professional, I'm a bit...
Maybe I'm a bit more precious about my poetry, or I have been, because I haven't been writing very long. I only started writing 3 years ago, so
but it's
these translations have opened my mind to know that, yes, there are, yes.
I think that's right. I mean, it doesn't
it's
mean
a thing that can evolve, can't it? So the ideas can evolve.
When someone's translating your work, do you usually want them to know what you are trying to express with your poems?
Not necessarily, as I said, if they bring their own interpretation to it, which expands my understanding of what I was saying, then it's, I don't need to tell them beforehand. Might discuss things afterwards, when I've got the translation. But
I think you can talk about intention. We did to some extent to get, to where we are, which is brilliant translation of poem in BSL and French. But in that sense, you don't always know your precise intention, I think, when you're writing a poem. And I think if you did, would it be a poem? Because I think that's why poems are very, they throw off lots of different meanings usually. But I think the best poems do. Because I think if they're too fixed, they could be prose or a factual piece of writing. So that ambivalence of the word I keep mentioning, I think is very important. But I think you can kind of have the dialogue and say, well, I think I'm meant to say this, but I'm open to what other meanings that word has and how you might translate it. So it's that kind of dialogue, really.
Some time ago I was an assistant teacher, and I had to access Seamus Heaney's poem. It's a GCSE syllabus for children who did not speak English. It's quite a difficult task to do. And one of the Seamus Heaney poems deals with on a farm where a farm worker drowns the kittens and asks questions, is it my responsibility for these kittens? So it's quite a very deep kind of poem about being responsible to animals. Then I translated it into Gujarati. And for me, the process of translation was actually a creation, because I had to reinterpret the original poem and put it into cultural context of Gujarati, of children who were brought up in this country to speak Gujarati. So it was quite a layered approach to the translation. And then I gave the translation to an adult bilingual who spoke both English and Gujarati, other than me. And they said, oh, they sound like different poems, but converging in their actual meaning. So although these sound different, the actual integrity of the poem was actually retained, even though the linguistic structures were totally different.
There's a young lady at the back who's got a question for you.
Oh yeah, I just was wondering if by considering the subject matter and the inspiration behind the collection, if any of the guests had perhaps travelled to areas where the refugees were first making contact, or if you met with them in this country or perhaps in Canada.
Did any of the contributors, I don't know, I cannot tell you if people actually, the people who wrote the poems have actually been to refugee camps or have been in camps. I can tell you that some of the poets, self-identify as being from refugee backgrounds. Others identify as coming from families that were refugees. Others, for others, those identities are not important. What is important is that we are people in the same space. And as people, we have got a duty towards one another, and we have got a responsibility. The responsibility that we have is that when we see something happening to the next person, we intervene. We don't keep quiet about things. We do not hold our peace. We speak up, because if we keep quiet about things, the things keep happening. It's like injustice, where you see an injustice happening and you don't question it. It stays. But challenge it a little bit, and you see things changing. Hopefully, maybe, sometimes.
I think we're close to running out of time, and I'm aware you have another performance to do this evening, but can I just ask how we, people in this space, can contribute to the continuum of the project? So if anybody here wanted to translate, make new translations of these poems, can they do that, and what should they then do with them?
Yes, we have got a Facebook page called Journeys in Translation. So if you search for Journeys in Translation online, one of the links that you'll find is a Facebook page. The Facebook page will take you to 14 poems that we are encouraging people to translate. Translate them, if into any language that you feel confident to translate, and then also write blog, talk about translations, write a letter to your friend, tell them about the exercise, about the poem, organize an event, just look at the issues. And it's an open project. Everyone is welcome. And also let us know what you've done.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Can I add something?
Yes, of course.
Just as an interpreter to interpreters, so I've worked as an interpreter for over 20 years. I'm very good at my job. I work full time, and interpreting is a creative act and about communication between people and conveying, expressing ideas. But as interpreters, we can become, we're not important, you're important, and it's about those people, those interactions, and about the produced text, whether it be spoken or written or whatever. So it's really important that you have your own creative acts, whether that be writing poetry yourself, writing prose, fiction yourself. Find your own way to be yourself as well as being the interpreter.
And also, one of the things that I absolutely loved about Elvire's involvement is that people with disabilities, whatever disabilities they are, or people who use sign language have been excluded from discourse, are excluded from discourse. So I think we include people by encouraging discourse. So this is one of the reasons why I appreciate Elvire's involvement.
And Ambrose has done some biogs of the translators, and on mine there is a link to see some original sign language poetry by a deaf person. So there's loads of deaf poetry out there. There's Paul Scott, John Wilson, Richard Carter, Donna Williams. They're all people out there who are creating beautiful sign language poetry. Have a look at it, have a look at the original stuff.
And for the texts, those of you who are students here, or if you go to the Blackboard module 7001, I've put the full document. So what you have been given today is 6 pages. What's on Blackboard is 86, I think.
And
all
that's
the translations and growing.
And that's of the 4 poems. We've got 14.
Yeah.
So 4 poems, 88 pages. Now imagine what 14 poems, how many pages that will come to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Unusually for one of our seminars, we have at the back a little bit of tea and coffee and biscuits. Anybody who can stay and wants to talk more about poems, maybe even sit down and write one or a translation, please do. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you so much.